So thank you all for having me here today. I really appreciate being here, and I've had some wonderful conversations so far with Soraya and Liz and Pastor Robert as well. So one of the things that Pastor Robert suggested might be a good idea that some people are doing is having somebody read the passage. And I was wondering if I could get a volunteer to read the passage for today, the Bible passage that I'll be speaking about. Do I have a volunteer?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Great.
From James 4:3 through 17.
13 through 17. Right.
Sorry. 4:13 through 17.
Right.
Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or do that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them.
Thank you. So how many of us as business owners plan for the next year in our business? Anybody here? Raise hands. Right, it's good business practice, right? Well, James actually has a different perspective on how we should be planning, how we should be thinking about our planning, and I'm going to speak about that today. So overall, in general for this passage, what he's saying is that we as humans think that we are in control of our lives. And in essence, we are not in control of our lives. The bottom line is that God is in charge, not us. So all we can do is estimate in our businesses and plan as much as we can, but ultimately God is in charge. And so taking that thought process into our mindset is the essence of these verses today. So he's reminding us to do our planning, and when we do our planning, keep him in mind and keep it in a humble place, and let our faith be the underlying driver. This faith means it's not just about us and what we get out of our planning, but what we actually give to others in our planning as well. So in essence, it's win-win for everybody. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through each of the verses today and sort of share what each of these verses means in my estimation anyway. So I'll start with James 4:13, where he gives a warning specifically about business forecasting. And he focuses first on the idea of trusting God. And he opens with the words, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a town and spend a year there doing business and making money." So there are 5 things he's saying in this one sentence, and he's very specific. So first he says they plan on setting out on a trip today or tomorrow. So today or tomorrow we will go. Second, they plan to arrive at a destination. Today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city. Third, they plan to spend a certain amount of time there. So today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city and spend a year there. Fourth, they plan to engage in business and carry on a plan of action while they're in that city. So today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, and engage in business. And then fifth, they actually plan on having an outcome in their plans. So the full verse is today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, engage in business, and make a profit. So they're very specific in what they're planning on doing. And it might seem that James is criticizing even short-term planning, but that's not what he's actually doing. It's the planning ahead that he's not focused on necessarily. It's that we are imagining that we are in control of that planning ahead that he has the issue with. So what he wants us to do in this passage is imagine that there are a group of businessmen in the day looking over a map, planning out which cities they want to go to, where they're going to make their most money in any of those cities, and then how much money they're actually going to make. And so they're going to portray goals and losses, determine what are the best and most effective means of getting those objectives and outcomes. So today, it might look something like this, because really today is very similar in a lot of ways. So Ms. Smith, Mr. Smith, Ms. CEO, Mr. CEO, our best projections are that company sales will increase by as much as 25% over the next 12 months, And in order to do that, we have to effectively use new techniques in our production that will reduce our costs by more than 20%. And in addition, we are going to take on new staff to increase our sales force by 15% and expand our market beyond the United States into Canada and parts of Europe. And we do that in order to achieve our goal of that 25%. I think probably everybody can relate to some of this, at least in your own planning stages. So let's take a look at what James is not saying through the passage here. So what he's not saying on the business side is he's not saying not to do good, effective strategic planning. He's not saying that business ventures or the making of an honest profit is a bad thing. He's not saying that capitalism is bad, not suggesting that it's wrong for you, for instance, to read the Wall Street Journal and figure out which stocks might be good for you to invest in. And he's not suggesting that you ignore social or economic or political patterns. And on the personal side, he's not suggesting that you don't do some kind of planning for your personal side as well. So, for instance, for kids who are graduating from high school, that they don't think about what they want to do following their high school graduation or even college graduation, or for those who want to go on to graduate school, what they want to do, or even for people in their jobs, that they don't think about what their career is going to be like or their business is going to be like. So he's not saying don't think about the future. So let's delve in a little bit deeper and figure out what is he really trying to say, because the questions come up that, such as, what is he really saying and what does he really mean? So verse 14 is about the true view of life that's not being taken into account by people. And in this verse he says, "Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes away." So in other words, all your planning, all your talk about planning, like in verse 13, you're not taking this view of life into account. So what he wants us to hear is that we should recognize our own arrogance in our planning and believing that we are the masters of our own fate. This means that what we want to think of ourselves as able to do whatever we want ourselves to put our minds to, and especially if that involves making money or doing the things that we want for ourselves. So what he really wants us to understand is that we ourselves cannot predict the future, and we can't control the future even more. So again, we have truly no idea what's going to happen tomorrow or even the next moment. And in addition to that, when he says that our lives are a mist, he means that our lives are temporary and that they're fragile. And to recognize that and recognize that we are a mist for a moment and then gone, and that in those moments, God is in control. So he's asking us to understand our human limits and accept those human limits instead of trying to ignore them. And then realizing how dependent and fragile we truly are is a major step in healing our anxiety and trying to control creating cash, pleasure, and power. So he wants us to carry with us an awareness that our every moment, every movement is dependent on God's control. In James 4:15, he says, "Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that." So this is the crux of what he's really saying. So the point is, we can do this and that, and we can plan our futures, but before we do that part, the words, "if the Lord wishes," are coming before that. So it's not that the planning is the issue, it's the planning is as if the future lies in our control that he has issue with. So we are responsible to use our resources, abilities, connections, and the time that God gives us sensibly. But what we're not in control of is the outcomes. And most businesses are actually very aware of this, and I'm sure you all do some kind of planning as well. Some bigger businesses actually have sections in their annual reports where they actually state what the specific risks are in the coming year, for instance, or 2 years, or whatever their plans are. And they make it very clear that business and their business is highly sensitive to whatever risks are happening within their market. So not only does James talk to people who may not think of God in this respect, but he also, by the way, is talking to believers in God and saying to the believers that they also should have the perception that God is in control of their lives. So why is it then that he's talking to believers as well? Well, a lot of believers may have the perception that following God will ensure that God will take care of them in every way and make them immune to the unpredictability of life and work as well. And this is a mistake. So James' words about what he's saying should make believers more aware of the need to continually reassess, adapt, and adjust our plans, both personal and business, to be flexible and respond to what is happening with God in our lives. In verse 16, he again continues. He said, "As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil." So the other point that James actually is making here is not just that God is in control of our lives, but God gives us innate talents that we many times start taking on as our own talents, and we forget in our day-to-day lives that God has given us these talents. And so when we start talking about our talents in a way that is boastful, he calls that boastful and arrogant, because when we do that, we are assuming and that we are better than other people, and we are not. So coming from a place of humbleness is what James is talking about in this passage. So not only that God is in control, but that we recognize that God is in control and be humble with that control. And give God credit for being in charge. And then the last verse, "If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do, it is a sin for them." So this last verse actually rounds out James' thought process. He knows that it's far easier for us to just go about our daily lives and forget that God is there and in control. And he knows that it's far easier to talk about being humble and being dependent on God rather than it is to actually live it consistently. So therefore, he is suggesting that we step back from our daily lives and think about God and how God is important in our daily lives and give God credit for that and thank God, and also recognize that God is in control and accountable to that and to be accountable to that understanding. So I thought in all of this that I would actually add some examples, some real life examples of how we're not in control of our lives, because we all go about them as if we're going through the next moment. But some terrible things have happened in the past, such as Auschwitz, where millions of people died. 9/11, of which we were all hugely impacted by. In Venezuela, the economy today is so poor that people are actually having to move out of their own country to be able to survive. In Europe, terrorists are attacking and killing people with trucks. And in the US and other countries, a gunman will come into schools or public places, and we've seen this just happen this last week, and shoot people. And it's very, very sad. But the world is chaotic, and so the point of this is not to take our lives for granted, but to thank God for being there in our lives and giving us our life as it is. So some other examples, I have a personal example. I have two daughters, for instance, who are going to college. And when they were first starting to go to college, they felt that they had to know what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives before they even started in college. And it's a huge stress on kids. And when they first started college, they actually thought that they knew and had it in their hands, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And now, after not even a year of college, they're not so sure anymore. So a business example, in 2016, Elon Musk predicted that the Tesla company would produce 100 to 200,000 cars in a year, and in actuality, only 55,000 were produced. Another business example, Microsoft just announced that it's closing down its Skype for Business in 2021. Nobody, I think, expected that. Smaller example, maybe. And in my own client life, I have a client who has a former employee who he found out is suing him in a class action lawsuit. And the contract that he made, and this is with other people, not this one, he has one employee who is in a combination of other people not connected with him. So the contract that he wrote for the employee was clear, it was lawful, it was all covering what the lawsuit is actually charging. But at this point now, he has to actually spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect himself and defend himself, and in the process may actually be bankrupting his company. And on a happy note in my life, God led me to this group. It's Raya, Liz, and Robert. I'm very, very appreciative and very grateful for God to have led me to this group. So just to wrap up, again, as James states in just a few powerful verses, God is in charge of our lives, and for us to think about God first in charge of our lives and in planning our lives. We have free will, we have our God-given talents, but God is in charge of our lives. Thank you.